you to bring your wool to him. And if you bring him your wool, he will trade you either spun yarn or he will pay you for it. But you could also just say, here's some wool. Please give me yarn.
We now have 17 people who've joined us on Zoom. So welcome. Thank you for coming. And I think we should get going in just a couple of minutes.
Very good. I think when we decided to stay on virtual programs after the new year, I think we made a very good decision there.
I am very happy to be broadcasting from my home today.
It's a lot safer for everyone. Someday we'll look back on the pandemic and we'll wonder about the decisions we made, but I think this was definitely the right one.
Yes. Agreed.
I mean, we've really expanded our audience to various household pets.
Humphrey is very much excited for this program, I can tell.
And different states, people in different
from
states.
all over, right? Yeah, it's nice. Nice to have everybody signing in for us.
Oh.
Complete with tail.
Oh boy.
He has certainly become very friendly since being rescued.
All right, it's 7 p.m. Would you like to start us off, Barbara?
I would love to start us off. Welcome to the Exeter Historical Society's February virtual program. Thank you for joining us. I'm Barbara Rumkunis, the co-executive director of the Exeter Historical Society. This program takes place in Misquamscook, now called Exeter, in Nadakina, the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples past and present. We acknowledge and honor with gratitude the Alnabak, the people, who have stewarded Nadakina and its Aki, Nibi, Walakwakak, and Nawaasak, the land, the waterways, flora, and the fauna throughout the generations. I'd like to thank Exeter TV for bringing this program to you through Zoom. The program is also being presented through Facebook and on Channel 98. Our March program will be held via Zoom at 7 p.m. on Tuesday, March 1st. UNH history professor Elijah Gould will discuss Alexander Hamilton's service during the Revolutionary War, the part that he played drafting the U.S. Constitution, his role as the first Treasury Secretary, and his growing entanglement in the Republican Party's conflict, which eventually claimed his life. There's no rap music soundtrack to this. You're just going to have to hear him speak. There are links to register on both our website and Facebook page. Tonight, Jillian will be taking questions after the program. My co-executive director, Laura Martin, will be monitoring the Q&A dialog box at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to type your questions there. If you're listening on Facebook, you can write your questions in the comments and we'll try to get to those as well. If you are interested in learning more about Exeter's history, visit our website at www.exeterhistory.org. And if you're a member of the Society, we thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to our trustee, Jillian Price. Jillian was the second high school student to win the Nancy Carnegie Merrill History Award back in 2008 with an essay about Exeter philanthropist Edward Tutt. She volunteered at the Historical Society while still in high school and left us when she went to UNH to pursue a bachelor's degree in history and anthropology. She earned her master's degree in history at Northeastern University. She volunteers regularly at the Society. She's on our collections committee, and she's one of our Exeter Historical Society trustees. She is our go-to expert on textiles. Jillian, thank you for presenting tonight, and it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Right. In 1867, John Hayes opened a speech before the National Association of Knit Good Manufacturers, reminiscing on Portsmouth's knitting mills of the past several decades. Knitting mills had spread widely through New England and the Great Lakes region by this time, and Portsmouth had been at the center of the industry's growth. Important improvements were yearly made in the manufactures at Portsmouth, Hayes said, and such skill was attained in making the goods, especially women's ribbed stockings, that the name of Portsmouth hose is still given to that style of goods without regard for the locality where those goods are made. From Hayes's remarks, it would appear that Portsmouth was nationally recognized for its knit socks. But the term Portsmouth stockings has not survived into the present day. Was Hayes, who was a Portsmouth lawyer, being overly nostalgic about an industry that was dying in his town? If anything, he certainly was trying to stir up national pride. The main point of his speech was economic protection, basically having the government support domestic industries by placing high taxes on imported goods, and in this case, imported knit goods. So how true was Hayes's comment about Portsmouth stockings? And what role did New Hampshire play in getting the American knitwear industry off the ground? You probably know knitting as a craft that is done with 2 needles. Unlike weaving, which has many warp threads and a weft going over, under, I'm sure this is a craft you learned in school, knitting is a different kind of fabric. It has a series of interlocking loops, and the resulting fabric is very stretchy. This makes it good for socks, makes it great for winter undergarments, long underwear and such, because it will conform to your body and it will not be bulky underneath your clothes. Now imagine instead if your socks were made of cloth. You tried to put on a sock that's essentially a cloth bag for your foot. It will not fit well. It will bunch up. You'll have loose areas. It won't be great. But indeed, this is the kind of stocking or socks people would have worn up until about the 1600s. But then in 1589, William Lee in England invents the stocking frame. This is a machine with a row of hooked needles that will produce knitted fabric for you. Now, originally, William Lee has some trouble getting his invention patented in England. Queen Elizabeth does not want to give him a patent. She is concerned that this will take away work from England's well-established knitting guilds, the hand knitters of the time. However, William Lee takes his invention, goes to France, starts a bit of a knitting industry there, doesn't get it right off the ground in his lifetime, but by 1600, after his death, the stocking frame has spread throughout England and Europe, and machine knitting is the way of the future. You can see from this engraving, I just wanted to point out, this is an engraving from 1751. The operator would sit on the bench that's at the front of the machine. Those levers at the bottom would be operated by the worker's feet. This would cause the yarn to go back and forth. The needles would grab the yarn, pull the loops through, thus producing a knitted fabric. However, here in Exeter and in America in general, in the early years of the colonies, early years of statehood, we do not have a knitting industry per se. All of our knit goods, socks, stockings, would be imported from England. They have a very established industry. We are spinning our own yarn here. There's local production, but it is very cheap, very easy to import goods, and that's mostly what people would be getting. There was, to some extent, hand knitting. We see in inventories, estate lists of the time, folks have knitted socks, they have knitted hats, but most of this, if it's being done by them at home, it is a practical good. It is not anything fancy, barring wealthy people, of course. Very practical goods are all that is being made at home because knitting is an extremely time-consuming process. I want to show, this is an ad for Joseph Champney in Boston, showing some of these imported goods you could get. We have circled up at the top, ribbed white and black hose stockings. We have striped caps, which would be a knitted, sort of similar to the winter style caps we wear now, would look kind of like that. And we also have different yarns being imported. So knitting to be done at home. However, again, it's very limited, very practical goods at this time. Now, I am going to be talking a lot about socks tonight. However, I do want to point out other goods could be made by machine. We have drawers, which are essentially long underwear. Knit shirts are an item that can be made on a machine, gloves and mittens as well. And in this image, we see Robert Williams of the HMS Venerable, a British citizen, but he is wearing a lovely striped sweater. This is an early form of sweater. It's called a Guernsey frock or a knit frock. And we would have been importing those in America as well around the War of 1812, until, of course, that cut off our imports. But this is a garment that would have been coming over as well. A garment limited mostly to workers and sailors, anyone who has to work outside. Not a fashion item, but a very lovely example of an early sweater. And I will talk about it for ages if I'm allowed to, so I will move on. All right, examples of these imports in Exeter. Here we have Josiah Ladd's account book from 1789. You can see the joys of research. His handwriting is very interesting, but I have translated for you here some of his items that he is getting from a leaf fillet lad, a dry goods dealer. Up at the top, we see 3 skeins of thread. For those, he pays 24 shillings. Next, he has a pair of white yarn stockings, which are 4 pounds. And then he has an item that is a little bit confusing. It's called a knit pattern. Now, I don't believe this is a pattern in the sense we would think of today as in instructions. It costs 10 pounds, which is very close to the amount he also spends the same day on a waistcoat. He spends 12 pounds for the waistcoat. Now, it's been suggested to me that this pattern could be a garment that is knit in pieces. You take it home, you sew it up yourself. And this is a manner of import that does exist. However, whatever this is, it does intrigue me. I'll have to keep looking into it. But again, Josiah Ladd importing very, very practical goods and paying a good chunk of money. Inflation is quite high at this time, but even 10 pounds for this knit pattern, it's not cheap to get your imported goods. Cheaper than making it yourself, given the time commitment, but still an investment. Now, let's see. It's worth noting at this time, not everybody is making their own clothes for their families. Again, with these imports, people can buy some goods, but the remainder is also being you could get items from members of your community who specialize in a certain item. You'd have weavers locally. You'd have people who make dresses, make clothing. And this would be done in an era of semi barter. You could acquire your pair of socks. You could get your dress from your neighbor who does this task. And then you, in return, could do a task such as bringing your oxen over to move a load of lumber for them. This is all accounted for, assigned a cash value, but they are not paying cash. Now, we don't know if there's anyone in Exeter who specializes in knitting. However, this image from the 1820 cattle show, the Rockingham Agricultural Society, is promoting that they will give a prize of $5 to the person who produces the best woolen stockings. Not less than 5 pairs, however. Now, to produce 5 pairs of stockings, this is a very time-consuming activity. Even if you're doing only knitting as your entire job, knitting a pair of stockings might take you several days. This suggests to me, yes.
We're having some issues with the audio.
Oh,
I was wondering if you could maybe try to either move the microphone or go back to what you were doing before, maybe without the headset.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Do you want to try that for a bit?
Okay. If that is better, I'll go with this. All right.
Why don't you speak for a few minutes and then I may interrupt you again.
Okay, I'm sorry. All right, what we're looking at here is an ad from the 1820 Rockingham Agricultural Society. They're advertising that they will give $5 to the person who makes the best woolen stockings. However, you have to submit not less than 5 pairs. In order to make 5 pairs of stockings, this could take multiple days per pair of stockings. This seems like a lot. And this suggests to me that we have someone in town, or in Rockingham County at least, who is dedicated to doing knitting as a job. And even to do this, 5 pairs of stockings in time to have them displayed at the show, I'm beginning to suspect that someone in town does have a knitting frame and might be producing stockings that way. Now, again, we don't have it confirmed that they're in Exeter, but what we do know is that around this time, the 1820s, we do have a group of English immigrants who have moved to Ipswich, Massachusetts, and are moving from there to Portsmouth, bringing their knitting frames with them. Now, one of these immigrants, his name is Robert Johnson, he sets up the Portsmouth Stocking Factory. Here we can see an ad of his. Another ad in the newspaper in Portsmouth ran, "Mr. Johnson now consumes at his establishment 200 pounds of woolen yarn per month, which he finds difficult to procure. People from the country would do well to direct their attention to the manufacture of woolen yarn and bring it to the Portsmouth Stocking Factory, where they will undoubtedly find a ready and profitable market." The same ad boasted that the factory was producing 1,200 pairs of stockings a month, with 11 knitting frames in operation. At the same time, Portsmouth Stocking Factory was not the only institution in town. There was the Portsmouth Steam Company as well, incorporated 1822, and they began by spinning yarn for weaving or for knitting, but soon moved in the 1830s to having knitting machines in operation making stockings as well. Now we can see in these clippings, these companies who are producing their knitted goods are advertising them by going to exhibitions, agricultural exhibitions and mechanical. These are from the Massachusetts Charitable Mechanics Association in the late 1830s. And we see the Portsmouth Manufacturing Company, same as the Portsmouth Stocking Factory. They change names quite frequently. We see them listed as good articles. They have a diploma. This is a 3rd level prize, essentially an honorable mention. They are successfully making socks. They are socks. That is what can be said about them. Portsmouth Steam Factory on the bottom left, also producing stockings, and in worsted, which is a specific type of yarn, all good and well manufactured, also received an honorable mention. They're getting off the ground.
Jillian.
Yes.
I'm sorry to keep bothering you. We're getting some complaints about the microphone. Is there a way that you can turn the volume down on the mic?
Am I too loud now?
Sort of. It's okay. Distorting your words a little bit. So it's not the volume as much as the distortion.
Let's see what I can do for Zoom. Looks like it will not let me turn it down.
Your voice did just dip.
I'm talking a little bit quieter now, if this is better. I apologize for this. We'll see what we can do here. Now, these are not an example of stockings from Portsmouth. We don't know of any examples of stockings made in town. However, what you can see from these is the seam up the back. Stockings in this time are knit flat. What would happen after they're knit in the factory is they are sent out to women in town who sew up the seams. They knit the heel by hand, they knit the toe by hand, which essentially is the most time-consuming process. Knitting the legs by machine can be done in a matter of minutes. Knitting the heel and toe on could take several hours. Here's another example. You can see this one is slightly different in the way that it's constructed. There is an instep and a sole, however, the same process of sending them out to the basically townsfolk, paying women by the piece to sew them up. And in order to learn a little bit more about this, I did a bit of an experiment on my own. Up in the left, that is my knitting machine from the 1980s. You can see the row of hooks that hold fabric. It's knit flat. In the bottom left, here's me knitting the toe on to the flat, unseamed piece. On the right, I've had to cut a hole in to add the heel. And then here we have the heel being sewn up and the finished product. Now, knitting this on my machine took, for the base piece, took me about 2 minutes to knit the base. To add the heel and the toe, that was about 4 hours. So the majority of the work is still being done by women in their home to make such a sock in the 1850s. Right. During this time, when the Portsmouth stocking factory is getting started, we start seeing patents being issued to Portsmouth residents, Portsmouth mechanics, who are developing improvements for the knitting machine. Richard Walker, a machinist at the Portsmouth Iron Foundry, patented a rotary loom powered by a crank handle in 1839. Now, this machine was designed in a way that it could be operated by hand, or it could be adapted to a mill system with belts and pulleys. This wasn't the world's first rotary-powered knitting machine, but it was one of the earliest in America, and his patent did allow him to start marketing his machines to mills in Boston and around the country. Now, unfortunately, this machine was not used in Portsmouth. Less than a decade after the industry got started, the government of the United States reduced tariffs on imported goods, so suddenly it was cheaper again to buy imported English stockings. This patent was granted in 1839, and in Portsmouth, the Portsmouth Stocking Factory the next year, 1840, has to lay off half of its workers due to the, quote, influx of foreign goods. The Portsmouth Journal of Literature and Politics, very vocal in blaming the current president, Van Buren, for this crisis. However, this is not long lasting. The government again reinstates tariffs by the mid-1840s, and the Portsmouth industry rebounds. At this time, they turn their attention to running knitting machines on steam power. This allows them to make goods faster and cheaper. Now, previously, if we talk about the Portsmouth steam factory, the steam aspect is limited to spinning the yarn. In this time, the 1840s, folks are starting to apply steam power to the knitting machines themselves. There's a machinist who works at the Portsmouth stocking factory, whose name is John Pepper. John Pepper is the son of an English immigrant. He himself is actually an English immigrant, came over as a child, and he successfully applies steam power to this machine. The New Hampshire Gazette published an ad saying, advertising his new improvement, saying, on Wednesday, one girl turned out from 3 looms, 23 pairs of stockings, and 22 pairs of drawers. The stocking factory at this time has 100 employees at its factory, plus 40 additional employees who work their frames at home. Now, it might seem odd for someone to have a knitting frame in their house. They're quite large. However, it's likely they had sort of smaller models that are maybe 2 feet by 2 feet, and they can make smaller items. Stockings, essentially, they could not make shirts per se, but they make smaller pieces at home. The factory also says they have 175 to 200 women in town who take the knitted pieces and sew seams and do any finishing work that is needed. Now, we notice at this time there's a shift in the language to the employees at the factory. They start saying, a girl turned out these stockings. And that is because the language is shifting to, the girls are there to tend the looms. The mill girls are there, they are not skilled. They wash the looms make the stockings themselves. And this is sort of a method of de-emphasizing skill and also being able to pay these male girls a bit less to watch these powered looms. Around this time, we do start seeing the name of Portsmouth hosiery getting out into the wider world, as John Hayes had said. This is an ad for a dry goods dealer in Boston, Portsmouth hosiery shirts and drawers. Now, we do know the Portsmouth stocking factory had agents selling their goods in Boston, so it is possible that these were made in Portsmouth. However, this ad is very similar to others that we see in Vermont, Massachusetts, around New England, using the phrase Portsmouth stockings as a category. They might say cotton stockings, woolen stockings, Portsmouth stockings. It's a category, it's not a brand name. And the best example I have seen of this, I think, is this is from the 1853 World's Fair in New York, the exhibition of the industry of all nations. And this is for Orrin Gardner. He is a manufacturer in Boston, Massachusetts, getting an honorable mention again for Portsmouth hosiery. We know it's not made in Portsmouth. We know he's making them in Boston, but they are acknowledging his work, saying they are of an excellent color and well adapted for common use. Again, it's an honorable mention. They sure are socks. He has done what he intended. But so in this respect, John Hayes, in his speech, was speaking the truth. Portsmouth stockings were a known entity, at least in and around New England. In 1854, this is the Rockingham County Agricultural Fair again, held in Exeter. Portsmouth Hosiery Company submits a specimen of hose, gets a diploma. Again, they sure are socks. The best prizes, the cash prizes, are, as we look down the list, going to women who have made the socks themselves. Needless to say, someone who has invested the hours and hours into making a sock, making a stocking, making a knit garment, it will probably be a higher quality, very custom, much more detailed. But from the aspect that Portsmouth hosiery is known as a common item, it is good for everyday wear, it holds up, it does the job. Portsmouth stockings are indeed known around New England. Now, unfortunately for Portsmouth, knitting mills at this time are spreading through the country, and Pennsylvania soon outpaces us quite rapidly. In 1860, the United States Census, lists that there are 100 mills in Pennsylvania alone, compared to 47 mills in New England, only 12 in New Hampshire. In that same year, New York produced 8 million pairs of stockings. New Hampshire produced 3 million pairs. So in this environment of a rapidly expanding national industry, the Portsmouth mills change hands multiple times. However, by the mid-1850s, Portsmouth Stocking Company shuts down for good. John Pepper, the man who had patented that machine, the steam-powered knitting machine, is recruited by out-of-state investors. His machines are purchased, and he is sent off to Franklin, New Hampshire, to work at the Franklin knitting mills. Portsmouth continues to make stockings to some extent, on a smaller scale, generally on hand-powered looms in individual workshops. We see in the records Thomas Wardwell and Jarvis and Brother. These are two English immigrants who have been in town from the beginning, from the 1830s. They continue their small-scale operations. Also, in the 1850s and 60s, women in Portsmouth, in Rye, in the surrounding towns, continue to take on jobs as piece workers, doing any finishing work for the mills in town, but also taking on piecework for mills in Boston. Large-scale production, of course, is the way of the future. In the 1850s and 60s, again, John Pepper, who has been sent up to Franklin Mills, starts working on a new kind of knitting machine. This is the circular knitting machine. Now, instead of having a sock with a seam up the back, which is not very comfortable, this machine can produce essentially a long tube that would make the leg of the stocking. Separate machines would put the foot on. Again, John Pepper is not inventing a machine from scratch. Other circular machines are in existence. However, what he does is, as in Portsmouth, successfully applies steam power to the machine, and he makes ribbed stocking fabric. Extra stretchy, essentially. It's warmer, it fits better, and he is the first to do this. Now, on the right, you'll see a sample I've put together of ribbed knit fabric. You'll see it has ridges, and it just is essentially much tighter fitting. So that is a John Pepper invention. Now, I want to show you, this is a video. I know it's sideways, it'll play straight up. One of our projects at the Historical Society has been restoring a circa 1920 knitting machine. This is something we've been doing over the past several months. It has been an adventure, and I wanted to give a shout out to Mr. Joe Bilodeau at the Seco School of Technology, welding instructor there, who helped us manufacture a part for this. But here is Barbara operating a circular knitting machine. Now you'll see, goes around. You can crank out a sock very quickly. Now, we still have some more restoration work to do on this. It sometimes skips stitches. But I think it's doing a pretty good job, and you can see at the bottom, that stocking coming out, the sock tube coming out the bottom. And so this could make a sock in a matter of minutes. Again, with the exception of having to do the heel and the toe by hand. But separate machines do exist in factories to help with that by this time. Now, this kind of circular knitting machine became very helpful to the United States during the Civil War. Suddenly, the Army has a need for very large numbers of knit goods. They need shirts, they need socks, they need mittens. The government puts out a contract, 65 contracts actually, to knitting mills around the country to make 2.5 million knit shirts. New Hampshire does not get any of these shirt contracts, unfortunately, but Laconia has several knitting mills. And Belknap Mills, in particular, fills very large orders for socks and for mittens. They have 200 women working at the factory, plus again, women in the town sewing up any additional finishing work that needs to be done on those socks. Another circular machine I wanted to show. Oh, here's an example of some machine knit circular socks. You can see no seam up the back and also ribbed at the top for a better fit. But one additional circular knitting machine I wanted to show you. This is a George Layton patent in Manchester. This is the photo is one that is at the Mill Yard Museum in Manchester right now, so you can go see it. You can see it has needles coming up, needles going horizontally, and this one was designed, you can see it's quite large. This is to do the legs of drawers or leggings, can do the arms of sweaters, could make stockings, but they would be quite large. This is a machine that would be powered by a belt and pulley system in a large scale mill, and was in fact manufactured in Manchester. George Layton has a manufacturing company there. Now I want to talk about a little bit, how does all of this industrialization impact knitting in the home? We start seeing agricultural fairs. They've always had examples of home manufacture at them, as that 1820 ad from the beginning showed. Wanted people to submit their hand knit stockings for a prize of $5. Now this one is from 1866. We still see a category in the middle, woolen and cotton goods, and this is now an established category. They know that these are being produced in mills. You get $2, not a huge prize if you are a full knitting mill. But as we look further down, there is, under miscellaneous, domestic manufacturer, drawings, all kinds of crafts, women who would have previously just been knitting for their own use, now have the expectation that they are doing fancy work. There is also the ladies department at the bottom, where it says specimens of needlework. This is not to say that fancy knitting didn't exist before. People definitely knit fancy bags and such, but that was limited to wealthy individuals. And now we're seeing in the 1850s, 1860s, women of more of a middle class farm communities are now able to essentially do needlework for fun. It's very low stakes. You don't, if your project doesn't turn out, you can go buy stockings, you could go buy your long underwear, your undershirts, it's fine. Now at the Historical Society, we have this lovely knit petticoat on the right. Now this is made probably the 1880s. The lady who knit this, unfortunately we don't know who it was, she did not need to. You could get these skirts quite cheap in the 1880s, but at this time we're seeing magazines being marketed to middle-class women for fancy needlework, projects to show off your skill, and it's seen more as a novelty now. It's like a skill you could acquire and be impressed. It's not something you need to do to live. This skirt you can see very similar to a pattern I found in Peterson's magazine, a magazine marketed towards middle-class American women in the 1870s. And another example is this lovely purse we have. Now, this is beaded. It's bead knitting. You can't really see the knit stitches from the front, and it is lined, so you can't see it from the inside either. But bead knitting is a very tedious process. You have to string all the beads on in the correct order before you start knitting. This is a project you would 100% not take on if you were in the 1820s, you're working on a farm and you need to produce food to live, and you need to basically just survive and make practical goods for yourself and your community. So this is an example of very fancy work that can be now taken on now that mills are producing your everyday goods. On the right again, we see an ad, not an ad, directions from Peterson's magazine for a similar bead purse. This one is for crochet. Crochet is a whole other option I could talk about. Separate presentation, but a very similar style of fancy work marketed to women who now are seeing that they should be spending time at home, developing their skills, doing art, and doing fancy needlework, essentially. The other final aspect of industrialization of the knitting industry is now we have an enormous amount of variety available to us. This is the 1902 Sears and Roebuck catalog. You can see multiple kinds of socks available to you for 40 cents. Now you can remember back to 1789, Josiah Ladd buying his pair of woolen stockings for 10 pounds, even adjusting for inflation of British pounds to American dollars at that time. 40 cents per pair of socks, extremely cheap, very affordable, very available to almost everyone can get these socks. On the left, you'll see also varieties of knit goods becoming used on a daily basis, essentially as your winter underwear. You've got to stay warm. There's no electric heating at the time. All these different types of vests for women to wear. And they're quite fancy also. There's been a lot of development in making them look not just like a basic square of knit fabric. There's personality here as well. And my final point I want to make is now sweaters have become a fashion item. If you'll remember back to Robert Williams, that the bosun's mate from the HMS Venerable and his striped sweater at the beginning. Sweaters in the 19th century, the early 19th century, are strictly working wear. Only for, say, fishermen, sailors, people who have to be outside in damp conditions. With the advent of knitting mills and the ability to produce these goods very quickly and in great variety, we now see people wearing knitwear as a fashion item. You'll see different varieties over here for the men on the left. Hunting sweaters is one that is very common. Sportswear is becoming very popular in the early 20th century. And we have these available for men and boys and women, knitwear for everyone. I think that is about what I wanted to cover today. I'd like to open it up to comments and questions. I'm sorry about the audio, so if I need to clarify anything that got a little skipped, that I'm happy to do so. So I guess we can open it up to questions.
Okay, let's start with some comments. We had a number of them. One attendee said, "Thank you, Jillian, for your presentation. It was very interesting." And Kathy said, "You're doing a wonderful job, very interesting and great visuals."
Oh, thank you.
Another, Stacy said, "Very cool, the knitting machine at the Exeter Historical Society." And I would agree with that. It's been a lot of fun watching you do all the work.
Fun is one term for it. It has been months of me going in on Saturdays, cleaning that thing up. I don't know if you could tell from the video, it's still skipping stitches. It needs entirely new needles. It's the fun of trying to fix something that's 100 years old. But yeah, it's been an adventure, and I'm very happy to see it working at all.
Well, you've done a wonderful job. Jonathan asks, "I have 15 pairs of socks. How many pairs would my grandfather have had in 1900?
In 1900? Well, looking at this ad, let's go back. This is a 1902. ad for Sears and Roebuck, for 1900, you could easily have 15 pairs of socks. If you were of a middle class. If you were, I would imagine you'd have maybe fewer at any given time if you were more of a working class, but you would wear them out faster and you could get them for cheap. So you're not limited in number of socks available to you in 1900.
Okay. Carolyn asks, can we see the machine if we come in for a visit?
If you are there on a Saturday and I am there, I am happy to show you. It's sitting there, so.
Garden said this was a nice tie-in with the fabrics exhibition at the MFA.
Oh, I haven't been there. That has been a problem when I was doing the research for this, of course, with lockdowns and such. Being able to go to museums to do research has been severely limited. So if that is still there, I'll have to see if I can get out there for a trip.
Kathy asks, do you know if most of the wool used at Portsmouth Company would have come from local New England sheep?
Yes, local even to New Hampshire. Now, as Barbara mentioned in her article this week, Exeter per se does not have a lot of sheep. Neither does the rest of Rockingham. Rockingham pretty much dedicated to mills of various sorts. However, if you get out to Carroll County, thousands and thousands of pounds of wool being produced every year. You can see that in the state business census and whatnot. The amount of wool being produced is definitely enough to sustain these small scale mills that we have in New Hampshire and in Portsmouth.
Okay, and one attendee asked, were these mills along the rivers?
Yes. Even the ones that became steam powered, the two in Portsmouth were on Islington Street near North Mill Pond. So that's what's on Islington Street right now, the west end of Portsmouth. And they'd be powered by water for the majority of the year. However, there is a recurring problem with mills in New Hampshire where the rivers go down in the summer, and traditionally, mills would have to stop operating when the rivers are too low. However, with the advent of steam, they could keep running. It was more expensive, but we also see that happening in Exeter with the Exeter Manufacturing Company. Not a knitting mill, a weaving mill, but we do see them shutting down in the summer when the rivers are too low, or laying off a bunch of their workers and running sort of on half power with steam, half capacity, just to get by until essentially the profit margins become better and the river comes back.
All right. John is very interested in his grandfather's clothing. He asks, how many pairs of pants would his grandfather have had in 1900? Now, I assume they wouldn't have been knitted, but...
No, he'd have some nice knit long underwear, I'd imagine. I'm very interested to know what your grandfather did for a living, because that would affect things. Now, if your grandfather was much like my ancestors in 1900, Polish immigrants working on the docks, you'd have several, like not a huge amount. But 1900 is the amount of clothing available to you in 1900, thanks to weaving mills, sewing machines. This is not like the 18th or the 18th century where you have like 2 or 3 waistcoats, 2 pairs of pants, and a shirt for every day of the week. It's not like that by 1900.
Okay. Jonathan also asks, do you know the location of the Exeter Agricultural Fair?
Ooh, well, they would definitely parade their cattle through the streets in the downtown. There would be exhibits at the town hall. But I believe there were probably other buildings used. I believe Barbara's written some columns on the cattle fair, so I'd recommend checking those out.
I seem to remember that they had some of their cattle out. There was an area out in the west end of town before the mill went up. So I'm thinking of the Charter Street area, which used to be wide open places. And that is, I know they used to set up circuses out there, and I think that they also had the cattle out there before the mill went up, obviously, and the place gets developed after that.
That would definitely make sense, but I do know they definitely would do parades where they would people bring their cattle in from other towns, and it would just come right through.
Christopher said, "Great job. I found this very interesting, and it was nice hearing from someone in Exeter. Love the demo of the machine."
I regret to inform you I am broadcasting from Rochester, but I am in Exeter frequently, so.
But this is Exeter-based research
Correct.
and Hampshire-based research. So, and of course, there's nothing wrong with Rochester. We appreciate you broadcasting from where you are.
Oh, thank you.
See, the rest are so far are comments. I've learned so much. Loved seeing the knitting machine. I may want to try it out. Enjoyed the history of knitting.
They're online. You could get knitting machines. I will say they can be quite expensive. It depends on what level of working order they are in and if you're willing to work to restore them. Even my 1980s one I have over here that I did the flat knitting on, I had to take that whole thing apart. It's the oil builds up in there. It's nasty, and they require care and maintenance. But if that is a project you want to take on, I highly recommend it. It's very rewarding, I think.
Great. Okay, one comment. I liked seeing the shift in affordability with the advent of machines and seeing the change from working class necessity to fashion for all.
Well, thank you. That is definitely a thing I will talk about for ages. I am very interested in sweaters becoming a fashion item from being basically just the thing sailors wear and kind of get made fun of for, oh, that guy in his Guernsey frock over there, to, oh, we are fashionable. We are going to go bicycling in our bicycle sweaters. It's fantastic. And they just look great, so.
Great social history. Stacy says, or asks, were there knitting clubs or groups once knitting became more commercial?
Oh, definitely, especially around World War I. I didn't touch on that, but that sock knitting machine that Barbara was using, those are huge in World War I, cranking out socks for the troops, which is funny to me because it's not like there's a shortage of socks. Like, they're not hard to get. There's definitely rationing and whatnot going on, and factories get converted, but just the American tendency to knit for the troops is just a thing that goes back forever, and definitely knitting clubs for that in the early 20th century.
Great. Are there any more questions? If there are, please submit them now or as soon as possible. May said, fascinating presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
And Vicki said, Jillian, we thoroughly enjoyed your samples of recreating the process of knitting in old times. Well done.
Thank you. One of my favorite things to do, reproduce historical knitting. I have a whole craft room for it now, so.
And don't you show a lot of it on your Instagram?
I do, yes. I have. Oh, I can point out my lovely sock blocking board here, where I have this giant foot, essentially. I can point these out. These are from 1920. My sister got me these from Philadelphia, from Pennsylvania, from an antique store there. And I had mentioned briefly that Pennsylvania far outpaced New England for knitting, but those kinds of stocking finishing boards, you can get them in antique stores all over the place down there, and they're all over here in my room. I love them.
It looks like maybe it was the inspiration for the 1980s leg warmers.
Yes, the stocking leg without a foot. The leg warmers were a thing, actually, going back. Like they were called something else. I'm forgetting the name for them. But yes, the footless sock as a leg warmer, definitely. I think they were just called leggings, actually. Definitely a thing in winter in New England. You're gonna need them.
That makes sense. Carolyn asks, did you just show your socks?
My socks, that was a sock I was working on knitting, yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Jillian. I know this is a huge amount of research that you've put together, and assembling a presentation is a lot of work, and we really appreciate it. And I'm sorry we gave you such a hard time about your audio, but
I'm sorry about that. I mean, I don't know what is happening, but it's been a while since I've done a presentation, so I'm happy to be doing it again. But I apologize for the technical difficulties as I reintroduce myself to the public speaking venue.
Well, it wouldn't be a Zoom call without, or a presentation without some technical difficulties. So. All right. Well, I believe that's it, unless you have more that you'd like to talk about.
I don't have anything in particular, but if people want to email questions to the Historical Society, I'll talk about knitting all day, every day.
Would you mind stopping the screen sharing and showing us your knitting again, please?
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize. See, technical things for Zoom. Yes, hang on.
You were just little.
I was little, yeah. You don't want to look at the Sears and Roebuck catalog all day? No, here's my stocking blocking board with a leg on it that I'm working on. This was just kind of a sample to show you what ribbed knitting looks like. I'm sorry about the focus. Yeah, can you focus? Yeah.
And you've got stripes, right? Little stripes?
Yep, that's ribbed knitting. So it's got the ridges coming down it. Very stretchy, very great for winter socks. But if you want to see my knitting, I mean, I'm also working on a sweater right now. Knitting everywhere in this house.
Did you knit the sweater you're wearing?
I did. I have to be on brand. Blanket behind me did that one.
Excellent.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for presenting, and